Thanks everyone for joining today's Mountain West 10 for 10. Today we have a special presentation provided by our newest business development officer, Nate Paul. Nate just returned from NADCO trainings in Las Vegas, where they've gone over some new SBA 504 hot topics.
All right, thanks, Danny. Yeah, guys, welcome. Welcome to the 10 for 10. Like Danny said, this is all stuff that we went over in a recent NADCO training just down in Vegas on March 4th and 5th. It was a great time. This first slide is just a little bit of my background. I'm new to the origination side of things, joined Mountain West's loan origination team in January, but you've probably seen my name before if we worked together on closings. I was in the closing department for about 2 years before this. And yeah, here's my information right here, my direct line and my cell phone. So let's get right into it. Today, we're going to cover nightly rentals, mainly like, Airbnb type situations and whether or not they're eligible for the 504 program, debt refinances with and without expansion, green energy projects, marijuana related businesses, because this was a big thing that's, started to grow and just gain more and more traction. And excess versus surplus land. So for the nightly rentals, what we want to go over is figure out, what's actually eligible, what's okay and what's not. The most important thing is that hospitality businesses that happen to use online booking platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, those are okay. We need to make sure that they're zoned appropriately, that they have a commercial business license and everything for their location. And one of the key things is that they have their own independent booking site. They use Airbnb and Vrbo as kind of secondary measures to fill in the empty spots that they can't book on their own. They have on-site staff and management. Doesn't mean, cleaning ladies that come in on the weekends or something like that. They truly have on-site representatives there all the time, and it's run like a true bed and breakfast. And I wanted you guys to think of, Shroot Farms from The Office. I'm sure everybody's seen this show by now. I'm recently in my most recent rewatch of it. So they are a true bed and breakfast. They've got employees on site, separate ways to book, and you can't place all of your trust in third-party booking sites like Airbnb and Vrbo. So there you go. Your big no-no is things a lot like your summer home in Newport Beach, something that I hope to one day attain, but we'll see. Next up, we've got our debt refinance section, both with and without expansion. I decided to throw together this little meme. So, if you've got a borrower struggling with high variable interest rate payments, our solution is the 504 refi. First up, we're going to talk about a debt refi without expansion and kind of the new updates that have happened with this, especially in terms of what is a qualified debt. So first off, it needs to meet the 75-25 substantially all test is what we call it. It used to be an 85-15 ratio. And what that means is that 75% or more of the existing debt was used to acquire eligible fixed assets. And the remaining was incurred for the benefit of the small business seeking financing. Next up, if there are liens on the machinery and equipment, they can be waived if we can demonstrate that the commercial real estate provides adequate collateral protection for the SBA. This is a new update. Basically what that's saying is that, if the appraisal shows adequate collateral protection, then there's no need to get an appraisal for the machinery or equipment. We don't need to add it to project costs, and we don't need to add it to the collateral package. It doesn't need to be secured with the UCC for our end of things. The current on all payments due has been removed by the Economic Aid Act. We still need to collect a transcript for the previous 12 months of payments, and the debt needs to be at least 6 months old. The main goal behind this is to make it more of a credit consideration rather than an eligibility requirement. So it's still kind of up to the CDC and the bank to determine whether or not this is something that they want to move forward with. And obviously, if the loan hasn't been active for 12 months, then we'll just need to see the payment history for how long it has been in place. This is something that's been around for a little bit. It's not quite new, but they made sure to point it out that the additional 5% equity injection has been waived since August of 2020 because we're still technically in a state of recession. And this is only on refinance without expansion. With that, also, the third-party lender, the bank is not required to be at a minimum of 50% if it's a special use area. We could move in favor of an even split between the lender and Mountain West, but no matter what, Mountain West can never exceed the lender or 40% of the total project, whichever is less. The OC does need to be 2 years old, and that includes ownership changes. One thing that they pointed out was that the 2-year clock starts from the first day of revenue, and that is including that ownership change. Next up, we've got the differences between the two. This is debt refi with expansion. There are a couple of big differences. There were some modifications that were made to without expansion and some that they weren't able to get through just because of certain wording with their proposals. But yeah, the big changes that happened with debt refi with expansion are that you can now have debt refinanced up to 100% of the project costs of the expansion. It used to just be 50%, but now that's kind of the big thing. So then the question comes to be, if there are debts that exceed the expansion costs, what can we do there? So it comes down to whether or not it's the same location. If it's the same location, then the ineligible amount of debt can be consolidated with the third-party loan as pre-existing non-project debt. If it's a different location, then the excess can be refinanced by the third-party lender or another lender in a lead position behind both the third-party loan and the 504 loan. Other than that, there's no updates to refinance with expansion. I just included some important notes that the OC doesn't need to be 2 years old. The existing debt doesn't need to be 6 months old. And here you can see the applicant needs to be current on all of their payments for the 12 months preceding the application date. And they still need to meet the 85-15 test. Don't let your borrowers get to this point. We all know how awkward it can be in that situation. So if we can help them with a lower interest rate payment, then let's do just that. All right, next up is green energy projects. One of the big things that they announced is that there's no more cap of 16.5 million on green projects. Now the borrowers get 5.5 million per project without a limit. The limit does not exist. In order to meet those requirements, you have to meet either 1, 2, or 3. You don't need to meet all 3 of these things that I've listed out. Just one of them makes it a green energy project. So first off is to reduce existing energy consumption by at least 10%. And there's all the criteria for it right below there. Second off is renewable energy production needs to be more than 15%. Most important thing between those two is that an energy audit will need to be done to kind of prove the savings and the production. And then the third is increased use of sustainable building designs. The example that they gave was that it needs to be LEED certified, but not actual LEED certification is required. And I included a link right here just to kind of talk about LEED certification and kind of what falls under that. One side note, if the borrower wants to do a refi and meet the green energy public policy goal, it will automatically be considered a debt refi with expansion. Because by nature, you can't reduce energy consumption without some sort of expansion. Even if it's something as simple as replacing the light fixtures to reduce energy consumption, it's still going to count as a refi with expansion if they're trying to do it like that. All right, next up, the big one, marijuana related businesses. Direct and indirect marijuana businesses, they're still ineligible because they are engaged in illegal activity according to the federal government. But hemp businesses are eligible and CBD businesses can be eligible. So for hemp, the important thing is that it follows the definition of what hemp is from this Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946. And I've got the definition here. I can send it over to anyone's way if they have more questions about it. If hemp is derived from THC, the THC content must be below federal, state, and local levels. That's kind of where it's going to get a little tricky. According to the federal government, with the definition from 1946, it can't have more than a 0.3% concentration of the Delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis. So that's something to ask the borrowers. It's not something that, I highly doubt any of us are going to have expertise on. And then CBD related businesses, the CBD has to be derived from hemp, still following that definition. No THC content above federal, state, or local levels, and businesses can't derive revenue from ingestible products or certain cosmetics that contain CBD and Delta 9. So honestly, that kind of wipes everything out. It's safer to probably just assume that everything's going to be ineligible, but we can always take a look at stuff. And excess land versus surplus land. Excess land is ineligible. It's typically already separated out into a separate parcel, and the SBA views a completely separate parcel as ineligible for the most part. Now, sometimes it comes down to a separate parcel is, just the parking lot of the building, and we've been able to work with projects that have that set up. But for excess land itself, it, could be sold off separately. The appraiser has to determine value separately and justify it, and its highest and best use may not be the same as that of the improved parcel itself. Surplus land is eligible. It's not needed to support the existing improvement. It can't be separated from the parcel. It probably won't contribute to the value of the parcel itself, and the appraiser does have to include it in the final property valuation. The example that they gave us in the training was, think of a hillside behind a property, something that's too steep of a grade to actually do anything with. In the past, we've seen some deals where there is just one large parcel and the appraiser calls it excess, but we've been able to make an argument to the SBA that it actually is surplus land, and we've been able to get deals through that way. Now for the CRA credit question, does anybody know when the 504 deal counts towards the bank's CRA credit?
We have one response here that says always.
Oh, you got it right.
Okay.
It's every single time. All right, guys. Any questions?
Let's give a few seconds here to see if there are any coming through. We do get a lot of questions about the marijuana related and unrelated businesses. We hope to see some changes there soon, especially for those of you in our Colorado market area. That's where we tend to get the majority of our questions. But until federal law changes, we're kind of stuck. Lynette has asked any details on a motel versus a hotel. Lynette, both of those are eligible. They're both considered just general hospitality. So we can do hotels, motels, and then like interior corridor, exterior corridor. I know different banks have different rules, but for the SBA, there is no differentiation between those two. It does not have to be a name brand hotel. We do non-flagged hotels, motels all the time, independent hotels. Okay, thank you all. We really appreciate your participation today. And Nate, great job. We appreciate your effort in putting this together for us and keeping us current on latest events. Thanks again.